Welcome to On the Spot Review. I'll be talking about It, based off of the Stephen King book It. I will not be talking about the 1980s or so miniseries of It. I'll just be talking about this movie. Going into it, I wasn't really having high expectations. I was expecting to kind of be disappointed. I was going with low expectations. I didn't think I was gonna like this movie at all, and surprisingly enough, it actually surprised me and made me and I actually like the movie. Uh, the story is pretty straightforward. If you read the book, if you've seen the miniseries, you kind of understand the story. A group of kids, they're in this town. This clown, this Pennywise clown beast monster, is tormenting them with their fears, and it feeds off them. And these kids try to confront their fears, and so on. That base storyline is very well done in this movie. It did not feel rushed. It did. And a lot of people kind of sighed when they announced that they were splitting the movies into two parts. One part being focusing on the kids when the main characters are kids, and then the next movie would be when they're adults. And I groaned at that too. I thought that was just it's obviously milking the movie. But I think when I saw this movie, it kind of proved that it did need to do that because it developed a lot of stuff very well. You get to understand the kids. You understand kind of where they're coming from. You understand their origin. You kind of understand why they are the way they are, how they became friends, and it kind of works very well in that regard, where you start to actually care about the characters. In horror movies, that is a thing that is hard to do. It's really hard to care about anyone in a horror movie, especially when it's like a slasher movie. In this movie, you don't really feel like any character needs to die, or you don't want them to die. You feel like, oh, these kids need to get out of there, this and that, and not a lot of kids do a lot of dumb shit either. There weren't a lot of moments where I sat there like, don't go in there, and they waltz right in. It felt believable and realistic in some ways. So I do like that. I do like how the characters are portrayed. But how does it stack up as a horror movie? It still has some modern horror aspects that I don't really care for. Most notably being Pennywise. I don't like his design in this movie. I thought it was a little too obvious and a little too try hard. Like, oh yeah, let's make his forehead really big. Let's, give him the, a stereotypical hairstyle. Let's make him do this the whole time because this is scary. I didn't really like how he was designed as much. I think, they should have gone for a more realistic approach with his design. I think the costume was fine. I think the costume works. Was. I just don't think his face worked. The actor who plays Pennywise, however, on the other hand, is a very good actor. He did a really good job with the role. He was actually, eerie, creepy, but at the same time, when he's talking to Georgie in the beginning of the movie, you do kind of feel the same emotions Georgie goes through, where he feels like this guy's a stranger. Then you kind of laugh at some things he says. You feel a little bit warm. You warm up to the guy, and then Pennywise starts showing his true colors, obviously, in that scene. And I think it portrays it very well. It doesn't feel, obvious, forced. It doesn't go too much in the cliched routes where it's like, oh, it's a clown, he's creepy. It does it in a very realistic way. I just don't think his design works completely well. Um, Other than that, the way that each scene develops each kid's fear does it in such a very believable and realistic way. One of my favorite scenes is the one where the Jewish kid, he's going to this the pastor's office or whatever. I'm sorry, someone's probably gonna get angry at me because I said something wrong or whatever. But he goes in there to put a book back. This picture that's on the wall falls right down, falls off. At first I was like, okay, this is a little cliched. Oh, he goes in a room and a painting falls. Wow, scary, right? But then when he puts it back up on the wall, the subject of the painting is gone, and then he turns around and there it is. It's not creepy, but I kind of liked how it was filmed, where it didn't like, oh, it's right there. Then it plays like a sharp violin or like zing, like it's not too corny about that. The thing that did make me scratch my head though was when he was hanging up the painting, he didn't react to it until he finished putting it on the wall, and when the camera panned behind him, it's like he waited for the camera to be behind him before giving a reaction. Like, you think, like, you see a painting that has an image on it, it falls, then as soon as you pick up, if you don't see the image as you pick it up, you're not gonna wait until you put it on the wall to worry about it. You're gonna be like, oh fuck, it's not there or something. It's a little weird how he reacted to it after he hung it than before, but I just kind of liked how it showed the subject of the painting kind of next to him, and it didn't really it didn't do some like crazy bombastic violin nonsense or anything like that. I mean, it's still kind of generic in some ways, but I appreciate that it kind of somewhat played with that expectations. The other thing is that the other jump scares in this movie isn't really predictable, and a lot of the scenes that I was expecting, there was no jump scare. And I do like movies that kind of go out of its way to kind of set up a jump scare, but then doesn't do it. It kind of gives you a false lead, and I think that goes a long way. I think a lot of horror movies fail in that regard because they just keep doing these same jump scares, and if you keep seeing it, eventually it's just gonna wear off because all it does is just like jolt you back and forth, and that's really all those jump scares do. This movie still has those kind of moments where they just kind of shock you. The scene where they're going through a slideshow or whatever, and then the slideshow starts moving on its own, and then all that kind of stuff. That was kind of shocking, but it was shocking like a kind of way. It wasn't like lasting horror or lasting fear. But the whole movie on its own, in terms of horror, it's kind of fun. It's kind of a fun movie to see. It kind of handles some areas very well than others. I like the more subtle individual scenes than when they all go to the mansion for the first time. That part was a little too much because it kind of threw a lot of stuff at you, and it just kind of wore off. The novelty wore off immediately in that scene, where at that point, when you get to that part of the movie, you just kind of feel, okay, and you're just over it. Like every time it tries to throw something that's scary, it doesn't feel scary anymore. And that after you see that part, as I said, the development's good. The story is well done. The horror is pretty good. I do like that it kind of had a message and a moral to it. It kind of portrays, kind of what the book was all about, trying to portray that at some point in your life, part of growing up is facing your fears, and in this movie, it kind of does boil down to that. And I do think that it works in that regard. The characters are likable. The only plot that I think could have been axed completely was the bullies. In some regards, it worked in the beginning to kind of set these characters up as losers, and you kind of like bond over that. You kind of like feel something for them, but as it went on, they just kind of their importance and significance kind of shrunk, and he kind of just didn't really care. And every time they would show up in the movie, they just felt kind of pointless. Like you didn't feel like that they needed to be in the movie anymore. Um, when Pennywise kind of tells the bully to start killing everyone, it's like you kind of expect the school shooting, to be honest, but you don't get it. Instead, he just kills his dad, and then he's off to kill the kids. And in some ways, you can say that, well, that's because Pennywise wants to kill these kids that kind of know his weakness or whatever. But it just kind of felt flat, and it just didn't have any point. I didn't feel that it needed to be there. I feel like if you take out the bullies, you don't really lose much about the story after, somewhere in the middle. You just don't really need them anymore. Some of the parents, I didn't really like I can't remember the name, the kid who had the cast on his arm, he's like a neat freak or whatever. His mom was a little weird. I was expecting his mom to be Pennywise in a scene. In one of the scenes in the movie, I was expecting her to be Pennywise, but she wasn't. But I just thought that she was a little weird, and and that's another character that I think that they tried a little too hard with how she looks and how she acts. I think she kind of felt too forced in some ways. And the other thing I want to talk about is the comedy. There's a lot of comedy scenes in it. There's a lot of jokes in it. And there's nothing wrong with it. I do like that in some scenes I appreciate the humor that they put in. But in other scenes it just feels out of place, and it just doesn't feel like it needs to be in this particular scene. Like, I don't know what it is. The humor in it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It just kind of felt like it was out of place in the movie as a whole. Other than that, I think the movie was good. I'm curious to see the next part whenever that comes out. The only thing I will say about about chapter 2, that whenever that comes out, I kind of hope that they keep these actors that they had in this movie and then start filming it once they reach that age that's in the book, because I think if you recast them just to release it next year or the year after, it kind of cheapens the feel. I think if you keep the same actors, film it when they're older, it's gonna pay off more. Um, but other than that, it's a good movie. I liked it. It was surprising. I was expecting to hate it, and I loved it. I think it was a good horror movie. As I said, there's some areas that needed to be worked on, but for a modern horror that we're gonna see a lot of in these coming months, I think this was a good way to start it off, where you get something that looks like it's gonna be a generic horror movie, and then you get a nice little story with characters in it. If you have the time, if you want to check it out, I do recommend it. I would give it a 7 out of 10. It's a really good movie. I think these shortcomings that it had might not bother everyone, but it just kind of made me wish that they went full out with it in some areas and they made it more subtle than making it as bombastic in some scenes. The bullies are kind of uh, a time filler, I guess. I don't know. But that's it for this video. Hope you liked it. See you next time.